Peter Sean Koski was a 24-year-old from McMinnville, Oregon. He loved rugby but suffered from epilepsy from a young age. On September 30th, 2012, Sean was with his cousin and others at a cabin in a nature preserve. When they went to bed, Sean was still awake in the living room. When they got up later, Sean was gone. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. Some of you who have been with Unfound for a while know that I've had an interesting and diverse array of jobs since my work history began like 35 years ago. One of those was the stage manager for a magic show in Las Vegas. I had that job for almost 4 years. Really enjoyed it. Magicians are really cool people, and I liked all of them. As you would guess, I had an opportunity to learn the secrets from many of their tricks. They are truly feats of ingenuity, creativity, and design. In fact, I am convinced the reason most people can't figure out magic tricks is because they underestimate how much true engineering goes into the simplest of acts. Yet, they are tricks. There is no magic. We don't live in a Harry Potter world, and there is no such thing as a ring to rule all the others. So in the case of Sean Koski, he wasn't beamed up. Nobody waved a wand. And surely a performer in a black cape didn't yell abracadabra, meaning something of this earth, physics, or psychology, or human frailty caused Sean to not be with his family anymore. The key is figuring out who, possibly even Sean himself, caused the others to see him, and then they didn't. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's site, charlieproject.org. By the time Sean Koski turned 24, he had already suffered more physical problems than someone twice or 3 times his age. The worst of these was his epilepsy, which was so severe it caused him to be classified disabled. Because of this, he couldn't get a job and could not be left alone for long periods of time. His family did all they could for Sean, but at times he did voice the idea that he was a burden to them. On top of all of this, Sean had gotten mixed up in drugs, which further exacerbated his already debilitating illness. So on September 30th, 2012, Sean's cousin, her boyfriend, and another person were at a cabin in a nature preserve outside of McMinnville. They offered to take care of Sean for a few days, thinking this would be a good way to get him away from the drugs and ease the burden on his family. That night, the 3 others went to bed. When they did, Sean was still up watching TV. Nothing seemed to be amiss. He was his usual self. However, when one of them went out into the living room later, Sean was gone, leaving behind his cigarettes, wallet, money, and medication. He was never seen again. His sandals were eventually found on the premises, one a week later, the other 3 years later. Since his disappearance, there have been many rumors that point in all sorts of directions as to what happened that night. Yet these main questions have still not been answered over 6 years later. Number 1, why were people so quick to start talking about Sean in the past tense? Number 2, why did someone call in his Valium prescription days after he went missing? And number 3, is it possible someone drove out to the cabin to collect on a debt Sean owed for drugs? Sean's immediate and extended family differ on what happened that night. The guest for this episode is Sean's sister, Bonnie Koski. Unfound News. As Unfound's listenership has grown, I've started to get more and more emails about covering this serial killer or those unsolved murders. I certainly respect those of you who think Unfound could help in those cases. But Unfound is an unsolved missing person cases program exclusively. And that's the way it will always be. However, I am more than happy to refer you to another podcast if you think it would help. Next, I am predicting Unfound in the near future will be covering a couple disappearances that we've been working on for a while. One, in fact, that takes me the whole way back to the first months of the program in 2016 when I had the first confidential conversation concerning the case. Another one is a disappearance I first learned about in 2017. So I'm really looking forward to finally bringing those cases to you. And finally, did you hear? I actually pulled off the Patreon live show this past Sunday night with no problems. I did it. Of course, it was with some help from Cherie. Thank you, Cherie. The show went really well. There were like 7 viewers total. Sure, I'd like a few more to be in there, but the almost one-on-one back and forth is something I really enjoy. If this kind of setup sounds interesting to you, sign up at Patreon at the $12 a month or above level. Thanks. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week I need to thank Talia, Dion, Crystal, and James. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. This week I need to thank Amy and Shane. Of course, that is also the email address. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Merchandise, the books at amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Don't forget the reviews. Shirts at myshopify.com. Playing cards at makeplayingcards.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Sean Koski, Bonnie Koski. Bonnie, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Let's start here. Sean's official name is Peter Sean Koski. Why is it that people called him Sean, his middle name?
My dad's name is Peter as well, and so it just was easier to go by Sean since there was 2 of them. Well, there was actually 3 as my grandpa was one too, so he just went by Sean.
Okay. And so he liked his middle name, Sean?
Yes, he did. That was his preference.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Just wanted to clear that up because we're going to be referring to him as Sean throughout this entire interview, and some people might be wondering, well, I thought his first name was Peter. Okay. You are his sister. Are you an older sister, younger sister, and how many siblings do you have?
I am the older sister. I'm 2 years older than Sean, and it was just him and I growing up. There was one older half brother my mom had when she was very young that was adopted out, named Ben, but we didn't meet him until much later in life. So for all purposes, we were 2 siblings, just me and my brother.
Okay, and how'd you 2 get along?
Well, I think probably the same as most siblings. I mean, younger, we got along and argued, and as adults, I think that we were pretty close. He and I went through a lot of things together, and especially because he had such medical problems, I took care of him a lot. So we had a very close relationship.
So you were very familiar with his epileptic seizures, for example?
So yes,
and treating them, and you got to see many of them, possibly?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And what was Sean into? What was if maybe because of the illness that he had, maybe he couldn't be involved in sports and things, but what was he into?
Well, he loved rugby. He played rugby for quite a while. Yeah. He played rugby a lot. He loved it. My mom hated that he loved it because it was such a dangerous sport and lots of head injuries. But my brother was a big boy. He was 6'3". He was thin, but I mean, he's a big kid. He did really well at rugby. He liked basketball, but I would say his passion was really gaming. He liked playing video games, Zelda, and all those things were his bread and butter.
Okay, so he spent a lot of time doing that. How would you explain his personality? Outgoing, a lot of friends, maybe girlfriends, male friends. What about that aspect of his life?
Gosh, what I would say about Sean is that he was very trusting, and he was a pacifist. He did not get angry very often, and he got taken advantage of quite a bit. The few girlfriends that I remember him having stole from him, did a lot of pretty awful things. I would say used him quite a bit. I remember an instance on his 21st birthday, he took out this girl and they bought drinks all night and then she left with somebody else. That just kind of seemed to be a pattern with my brother. He was just a really nice boy. And I think girls his age just weren't really interested in that. And so he did get taken advantage of a bit. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. And as far as his epilepsy, would you say that he struggled with it? I mean, was it?
Yeah.
It was. I mean, I know that there are varying degrees of it. I've never,
Correct.
been around anybody who's had an epileptic seizure, so I don't know. Of course, you do. How would you explain it?
So Sean's seizures, one thing I will say is that they were not controlled by medication, and he did not have seizures that were in one part of his brain. There's most epilepsy, there's ways to treat it. You can have I think it is still considered a lobotomy. They will remove that part from your brain. They'll set up electrodes and find where the seizure comes from, and they can cut that area out, which will significantly reduce or completely take away the seizures. And then other people can control it just through medication. Sean was not one of those people. He had almost constant petit mals, which are the smaller sorts of seizures with the eye movement or eye stillness. And then he had several grand mals a day. And I'm not a neurologist, so I may be speaking wrong here, but I do know that he had, on average, 1 grand mal a day, if not more, which is where they stop breathing, they fall, he'd bite his tongue. And he had broken his back with the force, some vertebrae in his back, just with the sheer force of his body, the strength in his body. And he was not supposed to live as long as he did. Every time we would take him to the doctor, it's like they would explain it like it's a computer rebooting, like his brain was having a harder and harder time coming back each time he'd have these really aggressive long seizures. With the lack of oxygen. And, there was definitely some side effects with that. And the way he handled it, I think the thing about my brother that people would say is that he really tried to not make it be an issue. He wanted to be able to do everything any other kid his age could do, which unfortunately wasn't where he was at. And I think that really angered him. It had to have sucked. He was, a younger kid that wanted to go out to parties, to be able to go do things that he had limitations for.
Yeah. Right. And how did that affect the family dynamic? I mean, was this something that he experienced? Was this, I guess I should say, is this genetic? Was this a genetic something?
Wow. So this is something our family has questioned. We did have somebody, and not in our immediate family, that had epilepsy like this that died from it. So the neurologist, it could have been genetic, but my brother also almost drowned when he was younger. Not too long before these seizures started happening. So there's always the possibility that the lack of oxygen to the brain could have played a part in this. But I think, genetics and that probably both played a huge part in it, because he wasn't born with epilepsy that we know of. He didn't start having seizures until I think it was around 6 or 7.
Wow. Okay. So it could have been brought on by this drowning. Could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Could have, yeah.
Okay. And being that this started happening when he was 6 or 7 years old, what was the family dynamic? You're a couple years older than he is. Of course, I've gotten to talk to your mother, but it's been a while. Mm-hmm. What was that like, trying to manage all of that?
Well, I think a big part of it was, my parents divorced when I was 4, and my dad had they both had very different opinions of how things should have been handled. But as my mom was the primary caregiver, most of the times it went the way she wanted it to go. And I think that everybody that was involved did the best that they could at the time, with whatever information they had. And I think the way it affected the dynamic was Sean got taken care of a lot. I think possibly a little bit more than maybe we overcompensated for him. I think my brother was capable in adulthood to do more for himself than we allowed him to sometimes, because there was a lot of fear. My brother,
Sure.
there was always in the back of our mind the fact that he might not live long, and so we pandered to him a little bit.
Okay. Because you never thought this might be the last day that he's
Right,
here. You
right,
never know, especially if he's having these seizures every day that are so bad.
right. And there was always things that happened with those. Like I had told you, he'd been hit by cars. He'd almost drowned as an adult in like a puddle. I mean, he was out with friends and he had a grand mal seizure and he fell in this creek. It wasn't very deep, but he was face down in it. And when you're having grand mals, you can't move yourself. And he sucked in so much water. I mean, he had to be kept in the hospital for several days because of that. So and he wasn't just hit by a car like once or twice. It was like, I think it was 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
He was accident prone, and a lot of it came from, his seizures, or a lot of times from his medication, him not having great reflexes or great problem handling skills.
What would he say about his condition? I mean, he disappeared when he was 24 years old, so he's an adult. He can think for himself and everything. What would he say about having this condition, and what were the conversations you had with him about it?
Well, I remember distinctly a few conversations with him about this. One thing is that I will say he was in a foster home for a little bit. My dad had got him into one, and my brother was very fearful of what was ahead of him. I mean, from everything that the doctors had told us, is that eventually my brother's mental capacities would break down and he would be handicapped. He would not be able to take care of himself anymore. And so when he was living in this foster home, it was a lot of older people that were at that point already. And my brother certainly wasn't there yet. He was cognitive, he was lucid, he could bathe himself, go to the bathroom by himself. But I think it was almost like a ghost of Christmas future for him, in the sense that he was seeing what the end game would be for him. And he hated it. I mean, it just was so difficult. He hated being there. And it wasn't, my dad loved him being there because he had lots fewer seizures. They had a very good diet. They went to bed every night at the same time. And, just with that difference in an environment, my brother did do better. But he was willing to not do better, to not have to live that way, if that makes sense. He didn't want to be at that stage yet. He wanted to go out and party and hang out with people and drink and, do things that 21-year-old kids do.
Right.
And it was really, you couldn't tell him enough that wasn't, he wasn't normal, unfortunately. He had this issue, and this, doing things this way could have made his life long-term easier. But he was kind of he thought it was worth throwing that away to be able to have fun.
It was a little bit of maybe a gilded cage. He was living better, but was it really worth living there?
Right, exactly. And I, hindsight, can totally understand that would be scary for any 21-year-old looking at what their future might be, especially as dark as that one was,
And when you say about like the ghost of future Christmas, you're talking about not something like when he would be 75, but these would be things that would happen to him much younger,
yeah.
Than those people that he was seeing.
Right, and they were surprised he'd made it as long as he had, and stayed lucid. But my brother, like I have said, he was losing his mind a little bit. We had to have him put in a psychiatric ward one time because he thought aliens were talking to him. He was in some sort of a psychosis. He thought we were ant people inside of human skin. And, those are really awful places to be. And it was especially difficult on me and my mom, because we had promised him we would never put him in one of those places. But we were in a position where, like I said, my brother was a big boy, and I had a very young son living with me, and he was living with me, my brother was, and I couldn't be sure that my son would be safe. Not that my brother was a violent person, but he was living in this psychosis world at that moment.
Okay.
So he was, it was happening. We were watching it happen, and it was happening slowly, which was even worse to watch, because sometimes he would be completely fine, and other times he wouldn't be.
All right. So, like you said, these older people, maybe something like people who begin to get dementia or something like that. There's good days, there's bad days. But
For
you
sure.
know that once they start on that downward trend, that's the way it's going.
Exactly.
There's
Yeah,
no medicine that we
right.
have in the 21st century that can change that.
Right. There was nothing that was going to fix this. The other thing about my brother is he was proactive in epilepsy. Like the one thing he wanted, he gave himself to science about once every 1 or 2 years. He would go to the neurological center. He would willingly get off all of his medications and they would do studies on him because he was so, I mean, I've got so many pictures of him from a young age that he wanted so bad to be able to help somebody that had this, make it easier on them. He wanted to be able to donate his brain. There was a lot he wanted to do to try and forward the epileptic study to try and figure out why this niche of epilepsy was so different than the other ones.
Yeah. Wow. That is so giving of him. Wow.
Right. And even as a young man, he was willing to go through just excruciating pain. I mean, he would get taken off Valium was one of the main things he had to be on, and the withdrawals from that are pretty heavy, and he would willingly get off all this medicine, and they would induce seizures with black lights and all sorts of things for a week. And he did it because he really wanted to help other people.
Wow. Gotta give him a lot of respect for that. Wow. Wow. But because of this, I guess he couldn't hold down a job.
No.
Things like that. He was kind of had to rely on the people around him. Maybe was he getting any government assistance, things like that for money, being that he couldn't keep a job because of his disease?
Right. And yes, he was. And because my mom was the one that kind of took care of that mostly, it wasn't right away that he started getting Social Security, I don't think. But my dad paid child support, obviously, and my dad had a very good job, and we were lucky in that helped immensely. He had great insurance, and my brother got really great treatment, and we were well taken care of. And as an adult, he either lived with me or he lived with my mom. And then there was the short stint where he lived in the foster home. But yeah, he did have to depend a lot for people around him.
Right. Okay. So he's in his early 20s, but at some point, was he living on his own? Did that actually happen?
Yeah, it's sort of. So what had happened was my mom and him had an apartment, a loft on Ford Street in McMinnville. And my grandma got sick, and my mom went to move on up at their house to take care of her. So for all intents and purposes, yes, my brother was living on his own, but my mom was 10 minutes away and was there pretty often. And he also had one of his best friends that lived there with him that helped him make sure he took his meds. My brother could cook, but I mean, basically it was kind of like a bachelor pad. So he got to have that part of his life that he kind of always wanted, because he was pretty much on his own and he lived with his best friend. So it was kind of a normal early 20s situation, which we didn't think he'd ever be able to be in. But Cameron, his friend, was really helpful and had also grown up around Sean, so knew a lot of the patterns for his epilepsy.
In your opinion, Cameron was a good guy?
I think Cameron was a great guy. I still am in a pretty common communication. I mean, we talk pretty frequently, him and I, and he took really good care of my brother and he loved him a lot.
Okay. Now, we don't want to hit this too hard because we really don't know if this has anything to do with the disappearance. But unfortunately, at some point, though, Sean, even despite his illness and the epilepsy, did get into drugs. I mean, how did that happen? I mean...
Well, what I will say is Sean started smoking weed fairly young. I mean, we know now that epilepsy has, marijuana has a pretty effective, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the word. It helps ease the body from seizures. So before medical marijuana was legal, Sean smoked a lot of weed illegally, I would say, because it wasn't legal yet. So yes, he got into marijuana. What I will say is that my brother, after he started injuring himself quite a bit, there was one incident with my kid's father, Bill. He had a grand mal seizure in Dollar Tree when Bill was across the street, and he fell on the floor and he broke his mandible completely off by banging his face onto the floor.
Oh my gosh.
And his mandible, I think it was the right side, completely broke apart, and he had to go to Newburgh Hospital, and they wired it shut, but he kept having seizures, which kept ripping his mandible off again. And it was a very long process of getting that to heal, because he had seizures so often that would, dislocate it again. And I think that's probably, all these injuries he had, he started taking a lot of pain medicine for.
All right.
And so most people know there's a pretty big cross addiction between opiates and pain pills, and then sometimes even heroin.
Sure. We talk about it a lot on this program. Absolutely.
Right.
Sure.
So my brother, I will say myself, I have been a long time heroin addict. I'm clean now, but I have struggled with it for years. And although my brother never did anything like meth or coke or anything like that, I have been told and was aware of that my brother had used some illicit substances like heroin before. What I will say is that I don't think my brother, and this is where, who knows if this is just me being a sister not wanting to believe it. I never saw my brother, sick in the sense of like a heroin addict or jonesing for it. I really believe that my brother used anything that he got for just pain. But again, I'm a sister, so who knows if I'm not just putting blinders up to that.
The listeners will judge that for themselves, but just to give the listeners an idea, in those last maybe 3 years before he went missing, how often were you seeing him?
My brother?
Yeah.
Oh, well, gosh, right before he went missing, he stayed 2 weeks with me. He had got found on the railroad tracks. He accidentally, one of the things he would do is he would overtake his medicine. He would forget he took it, he would retake it, and he would, forget about it and then retake it again. Yeah. And my brother did drink, and from what we have gathered from that night, he took too many of his medication, he drank, he passed out on the train tracks right across the street from his apartments. And somebody found him, and they went and called the ambulance, and he was airlifted to Portland. And I think it was within the day after that, they had him up there as John Doe, but he woke up and told them who his mom was, and my mom was contacted, and me and my mom went up there.
Wow.
And he was kept there for about a month because they treated it as a suicide because he had ingested so many meds.
Yeah. And he was on the train tracks.
Exactly.
That probably didn't help
was the
either.
other. Right. Exactly. Everything looked pretty shady, and I think my dad, if you were to ask my dad, I think he still believes my brother was trying to commit suicide. I don't. I talked to my brother a lot, and I don't think that was his intent. I think my brother had a drinking problem, and I think my brother had a life problem in the sense that he wanted to be able to act just like everybody else. And when you're taking epilepsy meds, alcohol doesn't affect. It is a much stronger effect with his medication than it would have been if he wasn't on it. So he stayed there a month, and then he came to stay with me. And we had found him this was about the time medical marijuana was approved. And we found him a foster home that was willing to take him, but they were getting their licensing in Amity for medical marijuana, for patients to be able to live there and use medical marijuana. So he was on a wait list of some sort to get into that foster home. But until then, he stayed with me until he was completely tired of it. He couldn't smoke there, and he wanted to go back to his apartment, and he did. But I would say, to answer your first question, I digress, but I saw my brother probably at least once a month, if not more.
Okay. So once a month at least until those couple weeks where he stayed with you.
And that would happen every once in a while. He would stay with me and my, his nephews for a weekend or a week sometimes.
Okay. Now, I do have in my notes, and some of these notes the listeners should know come from the discussion that I had with Sean's mother. actually way back in 2017. But I know she had told me at some point that when he was living by himself, that there were some questionable people around him. You had talked about
Yes.
Cameron being a good friend, but maybe there were some other people not so good.
So there was plenty of them. My brother, I mean, like I said, my brother, even though marijuana isn't illicit, lots of people smoke marijuana. And who knows how often he was buying pain pills or those types of things, but there would be people over at his apartment that would, stay there. And my brother thought everybody was his friend. He always assumed everybody was his friend. And that, unfortunately, most of the time wasn't the case. People would steal from my brother. He would let him borrow money. He felt bad for people a lot of the time. And, that was kind of my mom would get really frustrated because, she was paying part of the rent for this place and it was people were coming and just staying there, and not leaving and not helping in any way and stealing from my brother, and things would come up missing, and games and game stations and TVs and all sorts of stuff. So yes, my brother was not the best judge of character. And, he, like I said, he just saw the best in everybody all the time. And, I would get so frustrated with him and say, dude, why do you let these people back in your house when they've stolen from you? And he would always say, well, they must have needed it more than I did. And I'm like, dude, stop letting them in the house. Let them need it from somebody else. Like, don't be that guy. But he just had a soft spot for people.
Right. And so it seems that maybe these people knew this too. Not only were they shady, but they knew about Sean. They knew they could go over there and maybe get some drugs for free.
Absolutely.
Convince him that they're his friend and get stuff. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. All right, let's move on to this. Now, we're going to be mentioning some people, and frankly, these are the people that were with Sean the night that he disappeared. This is the reason he was there in the first place. We're just going to talk about these people, though, in general right now. Who is Kristen?
Kristen is my cousin. She is my mother's niece. My mom's brother's name is Dennis, and that is his daughter, Kristen.
Okay. And she, like you said, she's a cousin. And how old, in comparison to Sean, around the same age, a little older, a little younger?
She's older than both of us. I would say, gosh, I'm 32 now. She might even be in her early 40s, or maybe she's 38.
Okay.
She was like between 8 and 10 years older than us, I think. I mean, she's older than me.
Okay. And she's the cousin, and always get along with her pretty much up to family gatherings, reunions, or whatever the Koskis might do. Get along with her. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, she's not a Koski. That's my dad's side of the family. But yes, up until then, we were a pretty close knit. We all lived in McMinnville. It's a very small town, and we spent a good amount of time together. Yeah.
Okay. And Kyle, who is he? I understand that he was Kristen's boyfriend at the time.
Correct. Okay. Kyle was her boyfriend.
Okay. Did you ever meet him? How well did Sean know him? How well did Sean know Kristen? I guess, did they know each other, see each other often? Let's go back to Kristen for a second.
So Kristen, yeah, she and my brother, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Yeah, we all knew each other very well. My grandma and grandpa were kind of, the patriarchs of the family, and they had a swimming pool, and my cousin Kristen lived down the street from them growing up, or, up down the road. And we would spend whole summers together, all of us cousins, swimming, going down to the barn, riding four-wheelers. I mean, we grew up together doing things as a family. All of us did. So she was familiar with my brother's epilepsy. We had just been, me, my brother, and my new son, Madden, had just been up there a few weeks before. One of the last pictures taken of my brother was up at her house before he went to stay there, right after I'd had my son. And we went up there and we hung out with Kyle and her around a bonfire. Bill, my kid's dad, came up with us. So,
and it was a good time.
Right. We had a good relationship.
Okay.
Kristen was always a little eccentric and, was still trying to kind of figure out her life. Kyle was not. I think Kyle, it was the second time they'd been seeing each other. So we were familiar with him too. He'd been around in and out for a while.
Okay. And so you kind of knew Kyle too, the two had been a couple for a while. You had met him, maybe you had talked to him a little bit.
Yeah, for as much as Kyle would talk, he was kind of quiet. Kristen did most of the talking. He definitely, I mean, we would always not make fun of him, but it was always kind of like she wore the pants, you know, she kind of bossed him around a little bit. And he was just really quiet. He was a quiet guy.
Okay. And who is Linda? And we should know that Bonnie, the listener should know that Bonnie and I are still trying to figure out who this woman's last name is. I think I knew at one time. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it in my notes, but she is not a family member. No. Is she a friend of Kyle's, a friend of Kristen's? But once again, she was up at this Kristen's house in this nature preserve when Sean disappeared. Who is she?
Gosh, I know so little about her, so I won't say much because I don't want to, say something that isn't true. But she was an older lady. I think she might have even been retired, and she was renting a room from Kristen. I don't know how Kristen and her knew each other. I don't know what their relationship was. When I met her, it was very quick, and even after my brother disappeared, when she was up there, she wasn't around a lot. I remember she made cookies for the people that were doing the searches, but I did not have a lot of contact with her, and I don't know much about her.
Okay, so you were up at Kristen's place in this nature reserve in the months or sometime before Sean disappeared at the same location, and Linda was there.
I believe so, but I never saw her. I never saw her during that time. The first time that I met Linda was after my brother went missing.
Okay. And to this day, though, you still don't know how she ended up renting a room from Kristen and Kyle up there? No idea.
I don't know. Don't have any clue.
Okay. We'll come back to them quite quickly here, but so let's move up to the weeks before Sean went missing. You had said that not long before he disappeared, he had stayed with you.
Correct.
For a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And of course, we've gone through the issues that he was having. You felt comfortable him being at your place, being around. I don't know how many children you have or had at the time, and everything was good.
Yeah, everything was great.
Okay,
it was really good. I think at this point in time, I was clean and sober. I wasn't drinking, and I think that my brother, first of all, anybody that doesn't have kids, I had a newborn child, and then I also had like a 3-year-old, so he was kind of over it. I mean, as fun as nephews are, it was like, okay, I'm ready to not have this happening anymore. And there was a lot of restrictions at my apartment because I was newly clean and sober, and I was very strict about what my kids saw, and I didn't want him smoking marijuana on my porch, and he had to walk down the street to do it, and I didn't let him drink. And I was kind of like a Nazi at the time because I was new in sobriety. And
sure.
So I think after about a week and a half, he was pretty much done. So the plan was when my brother was supposed to come to my house instead of Kristen's. Kristen wasn't really in the deal until later, but my brother just was not interested in coming back to my place.
Okay, not after those 2 weeks there. A little too restrictive, but of course, obviously you were in the right. You have children. You're a recovering addict, so yeah, you got to have rules. You got to, of course you have to do that. So how is it then that he ended up going up to this nature preserve, which is where Kristen, just so I'm understanding this right, Kristen lived in a nature preserve?
Correct. She was like a caretaker of a sort. It's called the Flying M Ranch. And it's a nature preserve. Got lots of like hiking trails, things like that. And she lived in the house on the property, and I don't know in what capacity she was a caretaker for it, but I know that basically she was supposed to keep the grounds clean to a certain extent and keep an eye on things, make sure people weren't trespassing. And I don't know if she got a discount on rent because of that, or if she got paid, or how, I don't know what the deal was, but yes, it was a nature preserve. There wasn't any houses around. It was a big wide open space where people would go, for hikes and whatnot.
And Kyle was living there with her?
No, Kyle was not living there, I don't think. Okay. No, he would just spend, he was a boyfriend. He'd come stay nights. This was a weekend. And how it came about was my mom had tickets to see CeeLo Green with my Aunt Lori and her boyfriend Bob. And I believe it was in Las Vegas, and the show got canceled. And rather than just not having the weekend all together, they decided to go. The way Kristen got involved was we knew Sean wasn't capable, especially after this whole ordeal that had just happened where he'd ended up on the train tracks.
Mm-hmm.
We're a couple, at most a week, at little a few days for him to get in this foster home. We don't want him back in the hospital. He doesn't want to come to my house. I don't recall if he had. I know we had tried my dad, and I can't recall if my dad didn't call back or if my dad had said no. But for some reason, my brother didn't go there, and it ended up being Kristen's house. Kristen agreed to watch him, and so he went to go stay. I believe he got dropped off on a Friday and was going to be picked up Monday morning.
Okay. Any concerns now that you think about you look back at it now? Any concerns between yourself and your mother? Any concerns about him spending these days with Kristen up at this place where she was staying? Any?
No, not at the time, which is so. I mean, now it's like you think back and you think of all these things, but no, at the time, I mean, I could never have imagined this would have happened. It's still crazy to me, but no, there was no concerns.
Okay.
All we thought she was going to do was make sure he took his meds and he would hang out up there for 2 days, and that's what we thought would happen.
Was he going to bring is he into video games? Was he going to bring his game box or Xbox? I'm not into video games with him, or I mean, how complete was a move of this for these 3 or 4 days that he'd be there?
He brought movies. I know that he brought some of his movies, and I don't know for sure if he brought his PlayStation. He might have. But I know for a fact he brought some movies, and it wasn't a complete move. He had some of his clothes with him that I ended up seeing after he disappeared, and I think that was about it. My brother was a big fan of nature, though. I mean, he would have liked to go on walks around there. He was kind of a hippie, is what he reminded me of, like a new age hippie, He liked hanging out outside. He liked talking about peace and weird stuff. I don't know. He was an old soul inside his head.
Okay. I guess when I said full move, I'm just wondering how many clothes, like you said, how many clothes did he take? Those things.
I think he had 2 pairs of clothes. My brother.
Okay.
Yeah, he had 2 pairs of clothes. I can vividly remember the socks that they had the dogs smell for the cell search. Did not look clean. So, yeah. I think he had 2 pairs of clothes, and ultimately what he supposedly went missing in was a pair of long johns and flip-flops. So most of his clothes were left at the house.
Okay. And how far is this place from where you were living, where your mother was living, maybe where his own place? How far is it away from there?
Oh gosh, I'm so bad at this type of stuff, you wouldn't think. But okay, so my grandma's house.
You can just give us a drive time. It's plenty.
Okay. I could do that. Okay, so my grandma's house was maybe a 5-minute drive from Kristen's house, maybe 10. This was out on the outskirts of McMinnville, and my grandma also lived on the outskirts of McMinnville. I lived in Portland at the time, which is an hour away, and my mom, their apartment that they shared, was on Ford Street, which is probably about 10 minutes away, and then my grandma's about 5 minutes away. So
when we say nature preserve, it wasn't when I think of it, I think it's way out in the middle of nowhere. But you're saying that it was only 10 minutes away from your mother's.
Right. Okay. Out in the middle of nowhere. McMinnville is kind of like a country town anyway. So it was just a quick jaunt up the road to the country and the horses and stuff like that.
All right, so not far. No. But your mother is going to Vegas. She's going to go to Vegas anyway, even though this concert got canceled. She's
not going to go to Vegas. They decided to go to the beach instead. They canceled the Vegas thing. They went to the beach, I guess. All right, they went to the beach. They decided to still go do something.
Okay. And then you're doing your own thing. Your father is doing his own thing. And does he ride with Kristen up there, or does somebody drop him off there? How does he get up there?
My mom drops him off.
Okay.
I'm sure she stays and talks for a little bit, and the plan is for her to pick him up Monday morning because Kristen has work, Kyle has work. Linda, I don't know what Linda's doing because I don't know Linda, but maybe she has work. I don't know. Maybe she has a job. Who knows?
Okay. So what do you understand goes on from the time between him getting dropped off? What have you learned after over 6 years? From that Friday that he gets dropped off to the point that he actually disappeared. What have you learned about that time? What has Kristen told you? What have the police, and they looking around, what have you all discovered those days?
Okay.
What all happened?
Okay, so the timeline that I understand is that he was dropped off Friday. Between Saturday and Sunday, my mom received a number of just kind of weird texts. Nothing that was like huge red flaggy, but like pictures of my brother and Kristen saying, "You have such a handsome son," just kind of like off the wall type stuff. And then her mentioning my brother's epilepsy. I remember one thing that sticks out to me is she had said something along the lines of, "I know how to have how Sean, or how to make Sean stop having grand mal seizures. You give him water through a straw," which is like, no, don't do that. So, but she was mentioning a lot of things to my mom about my brother's epilepsy. Have you ever tried this herb? Have you ever thought about this? It almost seemed like she was trying to fix Sean. But again, in that time and place, it seemed strange, but it wasn't. I don't think my mom was necessarily worried that Kristen was going to do anything to Sean. It was more just like, okay, Kristen, that's enough. No, don't do that. He's got a neurologist that prescribes some medicine. We're going to stick with that.
It could have simply been that Kristen is getting to see that up firsthand.
Right, exactly.
Maybe she hadn't been around Sean that much, and now she's seeing him for 48 hours straight. She's saying, wow, this is really bad, and man, I really wish I could help.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Totally. I mean, there's so many different reasons, but there wasn't, it took a long time for us to ever have any like spidey sense about Kristen. We just, it's hard to look at that person that you've grown up with and think that. So,
and we'll get to that.
Yeah. So she has Sean, and then, whatever transpires between then, Saturday day to Sunday, Monday morning, my mom receives a text message very early that says, "Sean's missing," and I called search and rescue. So that was I was just strange in and of itself. None of us had been contacted to see if we picked up Sean. We weren't called to see if Sean had contacted us by phone. And she didn't text my mom to say, "Hey, did you pick up Sean early?" The first thing she did was call search and rescue, which we did think was strange, but not any stranger than Sean being missing, right? I mean, in the scheme of things, everything was strange at that point. So ultimately, throughout Monday and Tuesday, we all end up at Kristen's house, and they're setting up, the search party.
Okay. And what did you discover about that point that Sean went missing? When you got there, when your mother got there, what did Kristen or Kyle or Linda have to say about Sean's here and now he's not here?
Right. So first of all, when we all get up there, none of us are too concerned because, like I've said, my brother has had so many mishaps, and we were actually kind of joking of, like, we're going to find Sean hanging off of a cliff, drinking his own urine like Bear Giles. Like, this is not, we just didn't think this was a permanent thing because my brother was so accident prone. We just didn't see this as an end to something. So we were concerned, but we were not scared. I would say we were concerned, but we weren't fearful yet.
Okay.
And Kristen was behaving oddly. There was a lot of things that I certainly didn't pick up on. Like her talking about my brother in the past tense was something that the police noticed that I didn't notice.
Okay.
She started making lots of signs for the search and rescue teams that came, like thank you signs, and making them cookies, and just kind of some odd behavior. It seemed like was really trying to get involved in the investigation, like kept trying to go down to the they had like this man post underneath the covered area where they had like computers set up, and people were checking in because they were doing ATVs, they were doing horses, dogs, heat-seeking helicopters because my brother was considered disabled. There was a lot that had to be put in it.
So how many people would you say were there in those first few days of the search? Just
over 100, I would say.
Wow.
There was
really
several
that
different,
many? Wow.
Yeah, there was several different counties. There was Tillamook County, Clackamas County, Yamhill County, Marion County. I mean, it was a big deal. A lot of effort was put into it. And I don't know, I had mentioned to you, my uncle Keith was a oh my gosh, why can't I think? He was like the boss fireman in Tillamook. And he couldn't obviously go out on the search for, the reason that he's my uncle. But my grandpa is pretty prominent in Yamhill County on my mom's side. I think a lot of other strings were pulled to try and find Sean. I mean, it was a huge turnout for one person. There was a lot of people there.
Sure. I know. We talk about searches are quite a bit, and 100 people for a search, that's quite a few. That's quite a few.
Yeah. Like I said, there was dogs, ATVs, helicopters. It was a big deal. But there was always a very wide area to search. I mean, the Flying M Ranch goes back into this huge mountainous area. I mean, it's just ginormous. So there was a lot of area to cover. So they did, the grid search where they divvied it up, and people had, were holding arms and walking through brush and trying to find any sign of him because, like I said, Kristen said that the only thing that he was wearing was long underwear and flip-flops, no shirt. And this was in September.
And so when you're standing there and this search is going on, what does Kristen say, or her boyfriend, or Linda? What do they say about that night? Like they went to bed, he was still up. We know the general facts, but I think the listeners want to hear it from you. When you talked to them, what did they say?
Well, what they told us on several different occasions was my brother was watching Alice in Wonderland, and he seemed to be really enamored with it. He watched it several times, and Kristen kept mentioning that he fell down a rabbit hole. Like, it was really laughable. We're like, what? What are you talking about?
This is what she claimed, like on that Monday when you got up there, that was what she was saying.
Right. My brother must have went for a walk and fell down a rabbit hole.
Just like Alice.
Sure. Yeah, because absolutely. So she had mentioned my brother had been on several walks out in nature and loved it, and that the night before, he had asked to stay living with her. I'm pretty sure that this came up at this point. It's this is one of the things that's hard is whether I
understand.
This later
all I'm concerned about is the conversations that you or your mother, of course, she's not getting interviewed, but you are. What the conversations, just the one-on-one conversations that you had with the people who were there for where he disappeared from. That's what we're concerned about.
So basically what she said was Sean watched Alice in Wonderland a lot. He went for lots of walks, and he loved it up there, and he wanted to stay. Was the basic overtones of things. And then from there, Kristen, like I said, there was another strange thing that happened. She went to a job interview in the middle of this search and rescue, but she already had a job for my grandpa who owned an electrical company, which was another thing that ended up being brought up later as a very strange thing. She left with some bags.
All right, we'll get into that, but just those days that she told you that she's claiming that, did she claim that Sean disappeared on Sunday night?
Yes.
Is that what she's saying? It's not Saturday, it's not Friday night, it's Sunday night.
Sunday night. Sunday night he disappeared.
All right, and she is saying that they went to bed, he's still up, they get up later, he's gone.
Correct.
Just simple as that.
Yep.
Okay, simple as that. Okay. And so that's why all these people are searching all over the place. You were with Sean for a couple weeks, and like you said, maybe toward about day 10, he was ready to get out of your place because, you run a tight ship. Right. How far, given his physical ability at that time, do you think that he would be able to walk in that terrain?
I would say as far as anybody that's wearing flip-flops and no shirt in September. My brother wasn't, like I said, he played rugby. He was active. He liked going hiking. Unless he had fallen and had a seizure.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows if that happened or not. But I think my brother was just as capable as I would have been walking through that area in flip-flops and long johns.
Okay, so he was able to walk.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of his epilepsy, he could walk like a normal human being, like a normal
Sure.
24-year-old. And
Mm-hmm.
if it goes into the woods, could have gone a few miles, as a matter of
Yeah.
fact, if he was so motivated.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
night, and how cold was it? I mean, it's Oregon. It's late September, early October.
I would
How
say in the
cold did it get?
40s.
Okay, so
Maybe the 40s during the day, probably much cooler at night.
okay, so you wouldn't want to be out there without a shirt on, but
Certainly not. No.
okay, so
Not flip-flop weather.
okay, certainly, yeah, of course, of course. Okay, so these people were searching. Do they find any sign of him at all?
Nope.
Anything? Any like a
Nope.
cigarette butt? Does he smoke? Anything like that at all?
Cigarette butts were found on the porch, but no, there was no footprints of my brothers. And once the cell dogs were brought in, was when things kind of changed gears, because there was no sign of my brother leaving that house for any walks ever.
Okay. And while he was there, she had said, Kristen said that he had gone on some walks.
Sure.
Did anybody actually talk to Sean between Friday and allegedly the time he disappeared on Sunday night, or did they just get text from him? Did anybody actually talk to him on the phone and actually heard his voice?
Not that I know of. My brother did have a phone, but it was one of those prepaid phones and there was no money on it. They ended up taking that into, their evidence, but there was no contact from that phone. I'm not sure if my brother talked to my mom that weekend. I don't think he did. I think there was just those really strange texts.
Okay.
Did
he have a Facebook account?
He did, but he had lost the password to it years before.
Okay, so he wasn't using that.
It wasn't active.
Okay, so just to be frank, the only people that we have their word on that he disappeared Sunday night are the people who were there.
Correct.
There's no real proof that Sean didn't disappear Saturday.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe even Friday, because nobody really talked to him outside of those few people.
No. Right.
To your knowledge, did anybody, while he was there, go up there just to visit Kristen or visit Kyle just for the day on Saturday or Sunday?
No, they had nobody. I mean, those questions were asked. And supposedly nobody had come or gone from there at all during that weekend, except for Kristen and Kyle when they went hunting.
Okay. So it's that Monday, it's that Tuesday, all these people were searching. You're there. Your mother is there. If you can say, what are you and your mother saying to each other? Like you said, you were thinking, well, you might find them, but did you entertain any other kinds of thoughts at that time?
To be honest, no, I wasn't that worried. I mean, it wasn't until they told us he would not have lived if he's out there that I really understood the gravity of it. I was just so used to my brother always coming back. I mean, there, he'd been hit by cars where they were like, he'll never walk again. And here he is. You know what I mean? It just never, the things that people said about him never stuck. So it just did not seem real that my 24-year-old brother was going to die in this way. And what me and my mom were talking about was basically just good times. I mean, we were trying to share happy memories we were just talking about things that my brother had gotten out of, things we never thought he would make it through, and he came through better than before, so there was a lot of talk about that, and probably a lot of avoidance of what was really happening. I mean, really in hindsight, I look back and see that things were getting a lot more dire. The police were looking more concerned, and eventually Kristen kicked us off her property. And even then, I think we were really trying to hold on to there being a chance.
Okay. You had said before that by the time you got there, the searchers were already there. Did you say that was a little bit of a surprise to you, that she called search people first and called you second? You say you were surprised by that?
Yeah, that seems really weird to me. I mean, I know if I had somebody at my house and there was a plan to have them picked up that morning, I would have at least called my mom and said, "Hey, did you pick up Sean early?" Or, it seems strange that my grandma's within walking distance. My mom was supposed to pick him up that morning. It just seemed like an odd, chain of events to call the big guns in, not even just the police, but search and rescue. And
Okay.
to me, it seemed weird.
Okay. Well, on the other hand, I'm just here to play devil's advocate a little bit. Maybe Kristen knew that being that Sean was her responsibility, and then he's not there when he's supposed to be, she's like, oh man, I better make sure everybody shows up to try to find him. Maybe
Sure.
because she feels responsible. Man, I just lost Sean. What did I do?
Mm-hmm.
Just
That
playing a little.
could be it.
Okay.
Sure.
Just playing a little bit of devil's advocate there. Okay. So, all of you are there, and how long does this search go on before they kind of just shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, I don't know how much more we can do here?
Well, people start dwindling, I think, about day 2. Counties start leaving, and it's less and less people. And I think gosh, I wish that I had like concrete answers for you here, but I would say by day 4, they had pretty much all but pulled out. There was a few people from Yamhill County left, but from what my uncle had said, they had searched farther than Sean could have driven, and they didn't find. And the fact didn't that it wasn't corroborating the story that they were being given kind of made them, I think, second guess the way that they were looking at this case.
Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a second. What did if Sean did walk off, just took off, liked to walk, middle of the night, just gets up, might have had only his long johns and sandals on, but he went out there. What did he leave behind?
Well, this was the big thing for us, was, like I said, my brother was an avid marijuana smoker, and he smoked cigarettes, and his cigarettes weren't there, and his weed was there, left at the house. His wallet was left, all of his clothes, his phone, things you would think somebody would bring with him. I mean, I could see my brother leaving his phone. I could see him leaving his wallet, but I cannot see him leaving his cigarettes and his weed, especially if he was going on a walk.
Yeah. And looking at his clothes, I'm not saying you would know everything that is in his closet, but did it seem conceivable to you that really it was only long johns and sandals that were missing? Did it look like any other possible clothes that were missing?
Mm-mm. His jeans were there. I remember that, and I remember there was 2 I know that he wore pretty often. And his flip-flops weren't there. So, I mean, it made sense that that's what he was wearing.
Okay. So we have these things that are left behind. And did you say that at some point Kristen ended up kicking you off the property? You personally,
Correct.
or a group of people
all of
off
us.
the? All of it.
So it's one thing that did happen, and I have a vague recollection of this. Something between my Aunt Lori and Kristen happened. And I don't.
You're gonna have to explain who Aunt Lori is.
Oh yeah. Okay. So Aunt Lori is my mom's sister. She is Kristen's aunt.
Okay.
On my mom's side.
Okay.
Her and my mom are very close. She was up there giving my mom support, and she was up there because Sean was her nephew. Something happened. There was an argument, and she basically wrote this long text to my Aunt Lori, this very wordy text of, you're not allowed on my property. Don't even try coming back up here. I've told the police you're not allowed here. And it was just really weird. I can't recall what it was, a very stupid reason. And then when the investigation started kind of going in a different direction, she didn't want any of us up there anymore.
All right. So to be clear, at the beginning, she calls and there's like 100 people there. Then at some point, she doesn't want anybody there.
Right.
It's like she flips and goes the exact opposite direction.
Opposite. She doesn't want to talk to the police anymore. She doesn't want us up there. She wants them to continue the search. She's fine with that, but she doesn't want them at her place. They can stay down below. We can stay down below, but she doesn't want us up there anymore.
Okay. Did she have the authority legally to kick people? I mean, did she own that land? What was the situation there for her to be able to even kick people out?
So I don't know. I know that she was only renting it, but because it was legally her renting it, I think that she might have. I don't know. I don't think we ever like pushed the issue. We had more important things to worry about. But I mean, later on, we found that she had more rights than we thought she would have, as far as, you know, the police searching the house or her vehicles and things like that.
Okay, very good. Do you know who does own that land, where that is?
I don't know them personally. My mom has spoken to them. I don't know them.
Okay. Well, did they ever offer up an opinion about somebody disappearing on their land that they actually own? Any opinion on that?
I don't think that they did. I do know that when Kristen moved out, that they did allow a search to happen there in the residence. So they were more than willing to cooperate, you know, once they were able.
Okay. All right. So Sean's gone. They say that he disappeared Sunday night, and searchers are there. Can't find anything. It was a little chilly out, and once again, if you don't find somebody after a couple days, especially a person like Sean, who, like you said, had seizures every day, he has a seizure out in the middle of nowhere. That could be bad. And so it sounds like by the end of the week, the searchers are like, well, we've done all we can. I guess we're just going to have to rely on maybe a little bit of luck, you know, to find him. Maybe hunters, maybe come across him or something like that. But in talking to your mother, I need to ask you about this. Was there some sort of hit by a dog in a barn on the property? Does that ring a bell to you?
It does not ring a bell to me. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. I know that there was some activity with the dogs, which cast this whole thing in a different light, and that very well could have been it. I know that there was. I don't know if it was a hit, but I know that they were. The only place they smelled my brother was like the carport garage area, where the cars were parked under, and in the house on the porches. They didn't send the cell dogs didn't smell my brother anywhere else on the property.
Okay. To your knowledge, in the police talking to them, not saying that Kristen, Kyle, and Linda were interrogated. I'm not saying that. I'm just, when the police get there, when they talk to them, do their stories coincide? Do they sync up? Do they all kind of tell the same story about what went on that weekend and then his disappearance?
Frightfully so. That was another, you know, thing we found out later. Their stories were completely identical. I'm not sure if Linda's timeline was a little different because she wasn't out with Sean as much, but as far as Kyle and Kristen's story, they were verbatim the same, which was, you know, one of the concerns the police had, because they say it's pretty normal for somebody to get times with somebody kind of on the same page, but it's not very often when you know, and talking to somebody that they have the same exact story, same hot button words, same exact times. People remember things differently. And that wasn't the case with what they were getting from Kristen and Kyle. It was the same exact story, same timeline, same descriptive words of my brother. You know, just a lot of, you could tell that they had practiced it, a lot of practice speech.
Okay. You had been there, like you said. How many months before had you been up there, staying there yourself with Kristen?
I would say at the most 2. We'd been up there. I brought like I said, my newborn son Madden up there, so it was no more than 2 months.
Okay.
That I went up there.
And when you got there, and you would be one of the few people who would be familiar. Of course, the police wouldn't be familiar with the interior of the place. Maybe your mother would, but you go in there. Is there anything that you noticed that maybe seemed a little odd when you walked around where Kristen was living, being that you'd just been there a couple months before?
The only thing that was strange to me was like the bed where my brother laid down at. It didn't make a lot of sense until later, but my brother was sleeping on like a futon bed that came out of the couch. And in some of Kristen's statements, she was talking about like tucking my brother into bed and things like that, and the bed still looked made, that my brother was supposedly had slept in. And she had this whole story about how she tucked my brother to bed. He was watching Alice in Wonderland again. Her and Kyle had talked to him. He asked if he could stay and looked at him with these puppy dog eyes. And there's this whole diluted story about her being on this bed with my brother. And when I was there, it was still made. Like nobody had been in it. It just didn't, and unless she made it afterwards, which didn't really, again, fit in with somebody missing. I don't know why you would make the bed.
Mm-hmm. I do have to ask. We have to remember Sean's 24 years old, and I'm not here to make fun or anything, because here I am at 48 years old, and I love Pixar movies, even though I don't have any kids or anything. Does it sound normal to you that your brother was watching Alice in Wonderland?
Oh gosh, it was the Johnny Depp Alice in Wonderland. So, yeah.
Okay.
My brother, like I said, my brother liked to smoke, and I guess any movie's funny when you're doing that. Maybe he was watching it, but I think they played up his interest in the movie. The way they made it sound, he was watching that on, repeat for 2 days,
Okay. Okay, just asking. I just wondered if him watching that movie would coincide with what you thought were his
Sure.
film choices.
I could see him watching it.
If I ever disappear and somebody says, well, Ed was watching The Notebook, then that's a lie.
That's not true.
That's not true. Okay, that's all I'm trying to point out here. Okay, so things kind of die back down, but from what you've told me, and probably the listeners already realize this, is that your relationship and maybe your mother's relationship with Kristen is never quite the same after this, and maybe you can explain that.
Right. Well, let's see. So after this happened, the police want us all to take lie detector tests. Most of us do. Kristen won't. It's a lawyer. She won't talk to us about it. She did not take a lie detector test. She would not talk to police. She got herself a lawyer.
Okay.
And then I contacted her 2 times, and I recorded it, trying to get answers from her. And, they're like 47-minute long, drunk logs from her about how she feels slighted, nobody appreciates what she did, and she's being, people are mean to her now, and the family doesn't love her, and all she did was my mom this huge favor. And I finally said to her, did you kill Sean on accident? Was it an accident?
Mm-hmm.
And she breaks down, and she's sobbing, and she's thanking me for just asking her. And then she says, I can't even drive by a deer that's injured without putting it out of its misery. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Did you or did you not kill Sean? And she won't answer. And then the other thing she wouldn't do was she went hunting that weekend, and she refused to tell where she went hunting. And so I asked her why she wouldn't tell the police where she was hunting. And she said, well, Bonnie, if you had a good drug house, would you tell the police? And I was, of course, said yes. I would have told them anything if it would have helped.
And I don't think that analogy quite lines up.
No, it doesn't, but she wasn't making any sense. Right. So that was her argument for that. She refused to turn over any of her GPSs for her vehicles, for her phones. She just basically was hindering this, and my point that I kept making was like, okay, if you didn't do it, let them clear you so they can look at other people. If that's the case, let them do their job, give them what they want, and then let them move on. And that just never happened. She refused.
Are you saying to this day, and we're doing this interview February 27th, 2019, she's never taken a lie detector test?
She has taken 4 lie detector tests, but they have not been released. She took them through her attorney, and her attorney told the police that unless they were favorable, they would not be released. And she, that we know of, has taken 4. And we've never seen any results.
Okay. How soon after Sean disappeared if just approximation, were they all at the same time, or one every year? What we say?
Around the same time. I would say after 2 years, in between my brother dying or disappearing, and then 2 years after, 4 of them had been conducted.
Okay.
And we didn't see anything from those. And eventually, because she worked for my grandpa got her work phone and her work computer and turned those over to the police. And I don't think anything came to fruition from those, obviously, but her personal truck, where she went, hunting, none of that has ever been nailed down. They've never gotten any information on that.
Okay, we'll come back to her. What about Kyle? Has he ever taken a lie detector test? You said that he and Kristen's stories were remarkably similar for that weekend. Has he ever taken a lie detector test? Maybe not at the time, but later? Did police talk to him later? What do you know?
I don't know about a lie detector test. I don't think that Kyle got an attorney. If I did, I didn't really hear anything about it. But he just basically flat out refused to give any information more than what was given in the initial conversation that he gave.
Which is simply they went to bed, Sean was there, they get up, he's gone.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much, okay.
And yeah.
All right, we should note that Kyle and Kristen are not a couple anymore. Do you know how long after Sean disappeared that they broke up?
I don't. I do know that I tried to contact Kyle later, a little bit after I talked to Kristen, which was probably around within the year. And they weren't together at that time. So it was fairly soon after that happened that they were not a couple, but from what that's not anything I know for sure, so I won't say that. They about in the same year.
Okay. And have you tried to talk to Kyle over the last 6+ years about Sean, and what has he said?
I have reached out to him one time. I friended him on Facebook, and I think we might even still be friends. And I did reach out to him once. My goal was to be able to talk to him about it. But I have not found myself in a position that I felt comfortable being anywhere near him.
Okay. Did he offer to get together with you at some point?
Sure. Yep. Yes, he did. There was offer to go out and get a drink. And this was several years ago before I had. Yeah. So and I considered it. But I didn't know that I would be able to be calm enough to react to that situation in a
all right, so he wasn't willing to tell you anything over the phone.
No.
But if, let's just put it this way, if it could be in somewhat of a date, quote unquote, date situation, then
maybe
he made it sound like he might tell you something, but of course, who knows?
Right.
Okay. And then Linda, who once again was renting, I guess, at Kristen's place out there at this nature preserve. Anybody, your mother, you, anybody in your family, try to talk to her since 2012?
I don't believe so. None of us had really a rapport with her to begin with. She didn't play a large part in this, in the sense that, from everything that I've seen, she really was she was just an elderly lady that rented a room there. And I've never felt like she did play a part in this. So no, I don't think any of us have. The PI might have, but I haven't. Okay. And I don't think my mom has.
Okay, so you, in fact, we even don't even, as I mentioned earlier, we're not even sure what her last name is right at this second, and something I'm gonna have to, I think I did know it at one time. But nobody has talked to her in your family recently. And my understanding is that she moved out of the place she was staying with Kristen not long after this all happened.
Yes, she did move out.
Okay. And how long did Kristen continue to live at that place before she moved out?
I think a few years. I think at least 2 years. She stayed there for a while.
Okay. Even after she and Kyle broke up?
Correct.
Okay. You did mention a private investigator. His name is Ray Markham that somehow got involved. Can you explain to the listeners what went on there?
Well, we had been talking about getting a private investigator for quite some time. None of us were happy with how this case went. I don't think that it was handled very well personally, and we wanted to have a second set of eyes on it. We thought maybe we could get some more answers that way. And so my grandpa on my mom's side, my mom, found this gentleman through, he's worked on other missing person cases before. So they looked him up, and he got a retainer, and he, I think he worked for over a year,
wow.
looking into things, we did have a struggle because there's, I guess there's a law in place. You can't get the files unless it's a cold case. We thought it was a cold case, and we tried to get the files, and then they said it wasn't a cold case anymore, that they were going to open a new task force on it. And then they sort of did, but not really. I mean, nothing new came of it. It kind of just felt like the runaround of not letting us have the case file. So ultimately, I don't think Ray found, I mean, he looked at a lot of leads, a lot of other people that were indicated or could have had a motive, and ran those down to like nothing. With people with motives, people not being in the state, which really left the two people we were concerned about in the beginning.
When you say he ran down other leads, can you give an example of what some of these other leads or suspects who could, just in general, who they could be?
Sure, I can. I can't give you specifics because I don't have a great memory about these things, but there was a roommate of my brother's that he lived with for a short period of time. Like right before he moved in with my mom, he tried to live on his own, and he had this roommate who, again, took extreme advantage of him, put a whole bunch of bills in his name, Comcast, PGE. My brother moved out. He kept my brother's names, got credit cards in his name. And he ended up being in jail, and I think he was questioned, and he had his rock solid alibi. But of course, because he had done these things to my brother, there was some concern. He was a suspect. Then there was, there was a gentleman that I had dated once for a good amount of time, and he had been convicted of murder and acquitted on that charge. His name was Jonathan.
Wow.
And they, of course, because he had already been indicted on murder charges, he was somebody they wanted to look at. He was in Montana at the time and had a pretty solid alibi there, and no motive or no reason to kill Sean.
Okay.
And then there was another person, a trucker, that came up, and I don't remember his name. I think it was Frank, maybe. And how that was found was my kids' father was told by a friend of his that he was dating a girl, this gentleman Frank was, and he was abusive, and basically in context said something along the lines of, don't step out of line or I'll kill you like I did that boy out in the woods. He never said a name specifically. But, we brought that to the police's attention, and they did a lot of searching on him, or the PI did, and he was out of the state, couldn't have been there at the same time. Times didn't corroborate. And basically, he was just a liar. So, there was a lot of other things he looked into. The fact that my brother's prescription was called in by Kristen after he disappeared, his Valium prescription. There was just a lot of things that he looked into. But ultimately, none of it brought anything new to light that would have been helpful.
Did he try to talk to Kristen?
Yeah. And then he did talk to Kristen, I think.
Okay. And what went on there?
I don't know exactly. I know that, the things that I do know were that she was very inebriated when she was talking to him. She wasn't making a lot of sense. He was concerned that she didn't even know what she was saying. She wasn't answering questions directly, and kind of was doing the same thing she had done to me. She was answering questions with questions, getting very, the one thing that is consistent with Kristen is she feels like a martyr in all this, that people should feel sorry for her. She did us this huge favor of watching Sean, and now everybody hates her for it. Is basically how it came across. She's lost all of her family because she did us this huge favor, and we're basically these mean people that have cast her in a bad light, and she's lost everything, because of it.
Okay. Did you say that after Sean disappeared that she called in his prescription?
Valium prescription, correct.
How did you find out about that? How do you know that?
Ray found that out. And what I think happened was he went through some of her Facebooks and noticed something about it, and just ended up calling. And then I ended up calling because he wasn't a family member, so he couldn't get any information. And ultimately, I couldn't get any information. It was from a Walgreens. They keep all their records for like forever, but not on site. They have this other hub that has all their prescription records. But the woman said the only way you can get those things is through a lawyer or through a subpoena. So Ray brought this to the attention of the Yamhill County, police department that was supposedly still looking in on this case, and we haven't heard anything about it. I don't know if anything was ever done, if they did subpoena the records, if she did try to pick it up. We know she called it in. She even admitted to that.
And once again, the prescription was for
Valium.
Okay, which is something you already said that was something Sean was on to control his epilepsy.
Right.
Okay. And so how many days after he disappeared did she do that?
I'm not sure. It was at least 2. I mean, it was the weird thing is it was while people were still up at the house. It was while the search was still going on.
Okay.
But he was still for sure missing, so it didn't really make a lot of sense.
Right. Valium is going to be the last concern.
Right. And it's not even his most important medication. He's got, it just didn't make any sense.
Did you find his Valium in the place?
No, we didn't. There was some of his prescriptions that were not found, I don't think.
Is that right?
Yeah. But again, that was the last thing on our minds at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't really.
I'm asking you now in 2019 that you said that cigarettes were left behind, the marijuana was there, his clothes were there, but you're saying that some of the prescription medication he took with him was gone.
Right. There was some prescription medicine that was not there that should have been, I'm pretty sure.
And was Valium
among those? I think so. But again, I don't know for sure.
Okay, so you had this private investigator. He worked for about a year. At the end, did he give you like a summation of what he thought happened, if you can say?
I'm sure that he gave my mom one. And he had an idea of what he thought happened. And I can't speak to it because I don't have the paper in front of me, but I know that everybody's consensus has been the same that has dealt with this case.
All right, let's just put it this way. Did he think that Sean walked off?
No.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Okay. Now, because we're going to go to this, in 2015, so maybe approximately 3 years after Sean disappeared, something of Sean's was found. It was those sandals that we keep bringing up. Why don't you explain how that happened?
Well, it was one sandal. The first sandal.
Okay, one sandal. Okay.
The first sandal that was found about a week after the search and rescue. Kristen set up her own search and rescue. She put something in the newspaper, and she found the sandal by herself somewhere that was already searched in the grid search, and she found it. She took lots of pictures of it. She brought it to the police, and just by chance, she was the only one that was there when it was found. And then in 2015, another sandal was found, the other sandal, and it was near her house. It was in that area by a creek, but it wasn't consistent with something that had been out in the woods, for as long as it should have been. It was dirty, but it was it wasn't like mossy, discolored. There wasn't things growing over the top of it. It did not look like it had been there. It looked like it had been put there.
Would you say these are leather sandals?
Yes.
Okay, so leather would certainly out in the elements after 3 years show a considerable amount of wear. The other one wouldn't, maybe after a week, but 3 years,
right?
Obviously,
there would have been sun damage to it. There would have been discoloration. There would have been some sign that it had been out in the elements.
Okay.
Teeth marks from animals, something.
Okay, so she finds the first one, just to remind the listeners of something. That this, about a week after she sets up her own command center, this would have been right around the time that she was kicking you and everybody out.
Right. We were kicked out probably on the 4th day. It was just a few days after. This is after and she has started putting things on Facebook along the lines of, she feels very slighted. And then she mentioned something about how she wiped my brother and was taking care of him. And she just made him seem almost fully handicapped. She was saying she had to wipe him and that she had to feed him and things that just weren't true, or shouldn't have been true. And if she was doing those things, something very drastic happened with my brother that weekend, because my brother was perfectly capable of feeding himself, going to the bathroom himself. So she was going, putting these really long, crazy posts about how, she'd been wronged and we're doing all this bad stuff to her. And then she sets up something in the newspaper. She wants to do another search. People, become part of that search, and she finds this shoe. She takes lots of pictures with her phone.
This is the second one now. The second one.
No, this is
the first one.
This is the first one. This is the one okay. at the right after he's went missing. And then years later, somebody else comes across this shoe. She doesn't. Somebody else does.
Somebody else found one not near the first one.
Not near the first one, in a different place, same area, up in the same mountains, up by her house. I would say within a 3-mile radius.
Okay. Are these definitely his shoes? His sandals? Yeah. Let's just be clear. Sandals, are they definitely his?
Yeah, from what my mom said and the pictures we've seen, yes, they're the same. And my brother had huge feet. That's another thing. My brother had huge feet. I mean, these aren't normal size sandals. They're like size 13s. They're big feet.
Okay. So they're not found anywhere near each other. And is it your belief, I know you weren't out on every search or anything, is it your belief that these sandals were found within the search area that was done those days after Sean disappeared?
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially if they're saying they searched farther than Sean could have driven. Yeah.
Okay. So we're to believe that if he did take off, that he tossed one sandal one place and then carried the other one, walked with one sandal, and lost it somewhere else. That's what we're being asked about.
I guess.
Okay. Okay. But like you said, it didn't look like, at least in the second sandals case, that it had any wear on it at all.
Correct.
Okay. Because I had heard a story that regarding, I thought it was the second sandal, that somebody had taken Kristen up into that area, the morning before that sandal was found. You don't believe that to be true? Maybe I misinterpreted that.
That could have happened. I'll tell you, there has been so many strange coincidences like that it's very possible. Kristen still frequents that area, monthly, and does things up there. I just recently looked up, I haven't been on her Facebook in years because I just can't stand looking at it, but she checks in on Facebook in that area pretty often.
Okay. All right. So we got, nothing was turned up the first time around, but then a week later, sandal was found, and then another sandal was found. And approximately how many miles away would you say? Let's just say the second sandal. How far was that found away?
It was pretty close. They didn't do a wide area search, and pretty much they shut it down after they found that sandal. I would say within a mile.
Within a mile. Okay. And I do have to ask you this, being going back to things that were left behind, did, as you had stated, that, you kind of, while he was staying with you, he wasn't allowed to do some of the things that he normally did. Did he take any of his other drugs besides his marijuana and his prescription medication up to the...
I don't think so. My brother wasn't from what I have heard from his friends and from what I've seen, my brother didn't use... he was more of like a social user. I don't know that he ever even bought any of his own of that kind of stuff. I think it was more like people would come over and he would do it with them. So no, I don't believe they didn't find any sort of paraphernalia that would lead me to believe that he did anything like that.
Okay. All right. Let's go here. In some places, you will read about that it is possible that maybe Sean owed somebody money, being that he was doing drugs, even if it was recreational, maybe once in a while or anything like that. But it's out there, I'm just giving you an opportunity to talk about it. Is it possible that somebody could have maybe knew that Sean was up there, could have driven up there and, looking for money, taking Sean away? I know you had this private investigator. I'm guessing maybe he looked into some of these things. Anything like that? Any proof of that at all?
No, and I don't think I think that is an easy way out for the police, and I think that ended up being brought up in one of the interviews on the television stations. My brother, the only thing my brother ever had mass quantities of was marijuana, and he had a grower who was his friend who he went through, and there was no animosity towards them, and I still talk to that guy to this day. My brother had one person he went through. I've known him, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost wish that there was that kind of an avenue, so there was something we could chase down. But no, I don't think that's possible. Like I said, my brother didn't, front drugs, didn't buy mass quantities of illicit drugs. And I don't know too many potheads that are going to commit a crime like this unless it's over, kilos of something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly not the kind of, situation my brother was in. So
right. We have to remember that he didn't have a job. He was living off Social Security. I mean, how much money could he have really owed somebody?
Exactly. Who's going to front somebody who has no job, has no way to get any more money, any amount of anything? And especially because my brother didn't have, he wasn't a meth addict, he wasn't a crack addict, and he really smoked weed is what he did. I won't say that he never did heroin, because I know for a fact that he did sometimes, but he wasn't a heroin addict. He was an opiate addict in the sense that for his pain, but usually he just smoked marijuana for it.
Okay. Just maybe I'd ask you this. How many people actually knew that Sean was even up at that cabin that weekend? Maybe you, your mother? Not many, right?
I would say my mom, me. I don't even think my dad knew until Sean disappeared.
What his friend Cameron? How about Cameron, his friend? Would he have known?
Cameron probably did know, because he was the only reason he didn't stay at the house was because Cameron went to Eugene that weekend. So Cameron could have known, but it's not. Sean wasn't popular enough that people would have been wondering where he was at. Do you know what I mean? He wasn't like the social pinnacle. People weren't going to be too worried if he was gone for 2 days. So.
Okay. Speaking of Cameron, what has he had to say about this and Sean disappearing?
Well, Cameron was crushed by this. He felt really guilty. He felt, I think anybody that had anything to do with this, there's always the, if only he would have stayed with me, if only, things would have been different. I think Cameron has a heavy weight on him from that, and he certainly misses my brother. But I think, again, he has the same conclusion that everybody else has. So I haven't met one person that's heard this whole case in its entirety and come with a different idea.
Have the police ever, in so many words, told you what they think happened to Sean?
Yeah, well, so the first detective that was on this case, Detective Stackpole, he now is like, he's not a detective anymore, or maybe he is by now, but he did get demoted after this case. It was his first case of this type. And there's been a lot of speculation from my family that the reason that he was demoted was because this case just wasn't really handled very well, in the sense that they came on the scene and didn't treat it like anything was possible. You're supposed to go with open minds and, not just think, given the information you're given, that this is what happened. And for a few days, they trampled all over everything and treated it just like a missing persons case. And once they got the dogs out there and figured things weren't adding up, so much stuff was already screwed up and destroyed. So there was a point in time that he came to question me at my house, and, they really wanted to talk to Kristen. They felt like she had been dishonest with them. And they were, he's the one that pointed out to me that she was talking about Sean in the past tense. So they certainly had a lot of concerns around Kristen, and I think that they felt really frustrated that she was not willing to help. And I think any police officer that runs into that has to question why. Okay. They're so adamant about not helping, especially a family member. I mean, you should want to help regardless of who it is if this is happening, but somebody that is your family member that you've grown up with and you're at a hunting spot or you're worried about your GPS, those things don't add up.
Right. It's true. So he got demoted. What about the after him?
Well, then another guy came on, and he's now the sheriff of Yamaha County. Huh. And to be honest, I haven't been really pleased with anybody's that's been involved with this. I rarely get calls back. I can't tell you how hurtful it is to have to call in, especially with such a small county, and ask about, my brother's case and say his name and have people not know who he is. And they want me to tell them a case number. Because my brother wasn't just a case number. He was a person. And I can't imagine in that small of a county that they have so many missing people that they can't remember his name.
Right.
So I've, across the board, haven't been very pleased with the help we've gotten from the police. And I think a lot of it comes down to socioeconomic and the fact that my brother did do drugs. He doesn't fit into the idea that a lot of people care about.
Yeah, we run into that on this program quite a bit. We run into, women too. Women who are into drugs, women who are prostitutes or sex trafficked.
They're easy. Yeah. They're easy to write off. It doesn't matter that they were somebody's family. It doesn't matter that they had kids. They don't mean much to the police, and they can say against that all they want. But I was telling your assistant, right after my brother went missing, this other lady, this white middle-aged woman went missing in Dundee, and she was a known suicidal victim. She had suicidal ideologies, had talked about committing suicide, had a note. They had her on camera getting sleeping pills, and she was on national news, man. And she killed herself. I mean, everybody knew she killed herself, but gosh, they had everybody looking for her. She was on, CNN nationally, but she was a white middle-aged woman who, had money. Her family had money.
Mm-hmm.
And so she got a lot of attention. And here's my brother, who went missing under very mysterious circumstances. We have no leads on him. His credit cards haven't been used anywhere. We don't have him on tape anywhere. And we can barely get the local news to cover him. And, anybody that knew anything about this lady's case would tell you she killed herself. And they ended up finding her in the woods in her car, and she killed herself.
She hung herself. I remember that. I think she hung herself.
Yeah, she killed herself somehow. But it was just like we all knew that she was going to be dead because she'd written a note. But she got all this attention. And then we're begging people to please just come out and give us some airtime to try and get my brother's picture out there. And, we finally did get some airtime, and they edited down my mom's interview to just made my brother sound like a freaking vagrant drug addict, nobody. And it was so disheartening because they got a lot of information incorrect. My brother's never been to jail. I have. And they talked about him like he'd been in and out of jail, like he was a heroin addict and had been to rehab. That's me. They just got a lot of stuff wrong. And by the end of it, I had if I was on the outside looking in, it would make it hard for me to care. And it just was really depressing because it happens a lot to a lot of people that aren't in the right money bracket or the right skin color.
Right. Is there any proof that either Cal or Kristen or both left the cabin during that weekend?
No, I think everything is lack of proof. I think that's the key there. I think there's a lot. I think there probably would have been a lot to be found on their GPS, their text messages. I think that would have shed a lot of light on things.
Did anybody ever do any forensics on their vehicles?
Nope. None of that ever happened.
None. Okay. So nobody saw them. I guess what we're saying is the possibility, because let's just say something did happen to Sean in the cabin, something that was not intended. Okay. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he wasn't there when all the searchers ended up there on Monday morning and Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay.
Right.
So I guess he had to be taken somewhere. That's why I'm asking.
Right.
No possible sightings of either their vehicles anywhere, in town anywhere. Was she consistently using social media that weekend, being that she seems to use Facebook? Was there a long period of time where there's no entries, something like that?
Yeah, I don't think anybody looked at any of that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that was something the police really wanted to see, was the back of her truck. They wanted to do some forensics on that. They also wanted to do some forensic in the house to see if they could find any blood, luminol testing and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But while she was living there, we weren't given that opportunity.
Okay. what, just in general, what has Kristen done with her life since 2012?
Well, from what I know, after Kristen moved out of there, she went down to this really small town. I think it's Eagle Creek or something. She ended up engaged. At one point, the man she was engaged to got a hold of the sheriff in that county and mentioned that Kristen had, while she was drunk or she had been drinking, and she mentioned that she had this terrible dream. My brother would be found on her dad's property and she was going to go to jail. And it, that may not be exactly what was said, but it was something along those lines. And it was terrifying enough that the guy she was engaged to went to the police.
How did you find out about that?
The PI. The PI found in the paperwork that they had gotten this fax about, you guys might want to do a search on Dennis McGill's property. And it never happened. So we ended up, the PI set up a cadaver search years later. Mm-hmm. We went down there and looked and nothing was found. But at that point, who knows if Sean wasn't moved or, it was 3 years later. So. And
this is your mother's brother.
Correct.
Wow. Well, this has to be this whole circumstances, whether something happened in the cabin or he did walk off and somehow the searchers just missed him. I guess that's possible. I'm going to guess overall, being that, there are a lot of family dynamics at play. It's more than just you missing, your brother, but family seems a little torn apart by all this. Like you said before, sure. You're going up and staying at Kristen's, and everybody now, almost 7 years later, it's like the exact opposite.
Right. And it's tough on my mom. My mom, she loves her brother, Dennis, and she has since tried to, I think, rebuild because she wasn't talking to him for a long time, obviously. And it puts a barrier between me and my mom because I'm pretty adamant that I refuse to speak to any of them. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it has torn our family apart. My grandma's funeral happened a little while after my brother disappeared, and it was an awful, awkward, horrible event because there was just so much animosity, happening there.
Right. Okay. And when was the last time you ever have spoken to somebody? Like you said, you call them and they don't know the case number and all this. When was the last time you had a conversation with the police from that area?
Oh gosh, I'd say probably about a year ago. And about a year ago was when they had put it back into cold case. Okay. So.
Okay. Do you have a page set up for Sean's disappearance for him? What other locations can listeners go to find out more about your brother Sean?
So Peter Sean Koski on Facebook. It's just under Peter Sean Koski. My Aunt Kathy runs that page, and basically it's just any new information we have. If there's any body recoveries in that area, people can also post things that they know. It's just an open page for people to share things about Sean and other missing persons. We often post up any missing persons in that, in our area that we hear about to try and pass the word on about that. And my aunt, other than that, my aunt has got him in the National Missing Persons Database.
Mm-hmm. Name is sure.
Yeah, we got his blood and all that stuff in there. So that took a while to get taken care of, but we finally got that set up. And yeah, we would love to get some traffic on that site and try and get some more light shed on my brother so we can try and get this case reopened, or maybe somebody will remember something.
Right. Okay. Well, that's why I'm here. That's why Unfound is here. Obviously, to give some opinions and some suggestions off of the microphone too. I try to do that. Some private things, and that I'll obviously continue to try to help you with. If you have any questions, I tell that to all my guests that this is just the beginning of us knowing each other. Even if Sean's case is solved tomorrow, we're going to be friends for a long time. And I continue to help as much as I can. You're welcome. Any last words before we conclude this interview, Bonnie?
No, thank you so much for having me on, and thanks to everybody that's listening. This is an amazing program. It's so important to get these unknowns out there for people to hear about them.
Thank you for the kind words, and you're welcome. And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound, Bonnie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that was my interview with Bonnie Koski, sister of Sean Koski. I thank her for being on the program. I think all of you could hear Bonnie's anger, frustration, exasperation, and sadness. And I think you could tell that it's directed toward primarily one person, her cousin Kristen. In fact, at one point in the conversation, I think you even heard where I told Bonnie we want to just stick to the facts and what Bonnie personally heard and saw, etc. I wanted to keep away from the adjectives and adverbs that could be inserted into anything that was a statement of fact. So the question is, what do the facts say? All those items being left behind, but Sean's Valium is missing. One sandal found a week later, the other sandal found in a totally different location 3 years later. The fact that Kristen called in Sean's Valium prescription a few days after his disappearance. I'm now wondering if she ever picked it up. And even by Bonnie's own admission, so it's a fact, that Kristen up until that point was well thought of by everyone in the family. It's the very reason there were no concerns about Sean staying with her for a few days. The problem I have is either choice in this case is not one that sits with me very well. On one hand, there's the possibility that something happened in that cabin and Kristen, Kyle, and Linda have lied about it for the last 6+ years. It's hard to imagine 3 people with no criminal records, at least to that point, would cover up the disappearance and death of a young man with physical problems who needed their help. But the alternative is that we're supposed to believe that Sean took off in long underwear and sandals with no shirt in the middle of the night, disposed of one sandal here and then the other one like a mile away, and was somehow able to avoid all the searches that were done, and his remains have never been found on the property in the last 6 years. It's hard to pick one. But the facts are also these. People are much more likely to disappear at the hands of someone they know than a stranger. And drugs can cause people to do all sorts of unpredictable things, including walking off into the wilderness, in scenarios that are very much, now they see him, now they don't. So we have 2 popular reasons for disappearances that are competing in this case. That's why I'll leave the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.